Okay, we'll start with this. Well, on October 23rd, unbeaten Australian up-and-comer Taylor Robertson is going to be taking on none other than Shotgun Shannon O'Connell. Got a lot of mixed feelings about this fight, I do.
I like the fight.
I think it's too soon for Taylor Robertson to be having a fight like this. And that doesn't make it any less intriguing. It's very intriguing.
I like the fight.
But I gotta ask, what are Taylor's handlers thinking? What's going through their minds when they start thinking it's a good idea to throw Taylor Robertson, who's got a professional record of 3-0? 3 wins, no losses, 1. Just 1 recorded knockout. What's going through their minds when it starts looking like it's a good decision? I don't understand.
The girl's never been 10 rounds.
And you can interpret this move as being either very, very ballsy or very foolhardy, because it looks a lot like you're throwing Taylor to the wolves. Taylor hasn't fought any solid fighters whatsoever. 2 girls who were making their professional debut, and 1 girl whose record was upside down. 1 girl who never actually won a boxing match. How does any of this get you ready for somebody as experienced as Shannon O'Connell, a veteran of 28, count them, 28 professional fights, having debuted in 2011. Currently, she's going on a tear. She's been beating all these unbeaten fighters, most of which have more professional experience than Taylor Robertson, Bianca Elmire, Kylie Fulmer, Shernika Johnson. Shernika, in particular, who I have a very high opinion of, ahead of that Shannon O'Connell fight, she had a professional record of 13 wins and no losses, far more pro experience than Taylor Robertson has ahead of this same fight with this same fighter. And Shernika lost a very tight decision. So what kind of odds are you supposed to give Taylor, who's younger and has even less experience than Shernika? Taylor Robertson, like Shernika Johnson, she's more finesse than ferocity.
Yeah, she's not really a gunslinger.
Whereas Shotgun Shannon O'Connell, she is. She's aggressive. She applies the pressure. Yeah, Shannon, she's amassed a couple of losses last couple of years. She's only ever really lost to top-tier, top-shelf fighters like Argentina's own Marcela Acuña, Helen Joseph, Hyun Mi Choi, many years ago.
Deanna Prozac.
Just gave the very experienced Kaylee Reese, reigning WBA
champion,
junior welterweight champion, a run for her money up there at 140 pounds. Deanna beat Shannon O'Connell years ago. It's established that you have to compete at a certain level in order to beat Shannon. And Taylor, she hadn't even scratched the surface.
I don't know what her handlers are thinking.
This is either a very ballsy, very gutsy move based on their confidence in her, or a very foolhardy move that sees them throwing young Taylor to the wolves. I don't know whether I should like this fight or advocate against it, because there is an air of intrigue. What would leave Taylor Robertson's handlers so inclined to match her against someone like Shannon O'Connell? I mean, there's confidence, there's having confidence, and then there's throwing caution to the wind, and I can't help but think that that's what they're doing here. They're throwing caution to the wind, and I don't know why, because Taylor Robertson should be fighting someone like a Corey Farr or a Bianca Elmire, not a Shotgun Shannon O'Connell.
A Kylie Fulmer fight makes more sense than this.
For Shannon, this could very well be the 4th unbeaten fighter she has beaten in her last 6 professional fights. I reiterate, she gave the then unbeaten Bianca Elmire her first professional loss. She gave Kylie Fulmer her first professional loss. And in her last fight, she gave unbeaten Shernika Johnson her first professional loss. Taylor Robertson could be the 4th fighter that Shotgun Shannon O'Connell dishes out their first professional loss too. It's entirely possible. I don't know what the game plan here is. By all rights, Shotgun Shannon O'Connell should either be fighting for the WBA title against the reigning WBA champion Shannon Courtenay, or
Rachel Ball, somebody like that.
Rachel Ball, who we all know beat Shannon Courtenay last year. Those fights for Shannon make a lot more sense than a fight with Taylor. I'm just being honest, because Shannon is in a pole position via the WBA's ranked standings to challenge for the title. So one would expect that she'd take on someone a lot more seasoned than Taylor Robertson. I'll tell you, the fight's intriguing. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know why Taylor Robertson's handlers are going through with this.
It's a fucking mystery to me.
Especially when the only thing Taylor's got on her side is youth and not much else. The edge in experience, quality of competition, the edge in power. All of that has to go to Shannon O'Connell, who may be the older fighter, but in this situation, that might not be such a bad thing.
Shannon's got more knockouts than Taylor has fights.
I just don't understand. And this very intriguing matchup of Australian brawlers is set to go down in the fall this year in late October.
Mixed feelings.
It's very hard to look at this as an even matchup of any kind when everything seems rather uneven, lopsided almost, in favor of Shotgun Shannon O'Connell. I don't know why Taylor Robertson's team would let her go into a fight like this. I can only assume that they have supreme confidence in her abilities. Maybe they see something in Shannon they think they can exploit.
I don't know what.
Shannon O'Connell is 15 years older, approximately 15 years older than young Taylor Robertson. But in a situation like this, that's not exactly a bad thing. She has a treasure trove of experiences to draw from, whereas Taylor's swimming on the deep end. I don't know if she's ready for this. On paper, doesn't look like she is.
Gutsy, man.
Kid's got guts. Keep your eyes peeled for this in the land down under in late October. I'm just telling you now. The edge in experience, the edge in power and aggressiveness, all that jazz. It's gotta go to Shannon O'Connell. There's no other way to slice it. Another news I'm sure most of you have heard by now. It's official. Tszyu has been installed as the mandatory challenger for the WBO title at 154 pounds. His handler, Glenn Jennings, took to social media to inform everyone of the news. Tszyu himself was quoted as saying, "I'm coming for the whole PBC roster. I'll fight Tony Harrison before the world title just to take him out. Then Brian Castano, Jermell Charlo. I want the PBC fighters one by one." Momentous news for young Tszyu, though his title shot is contingent upon the status of Charlo versus Castano too, whether or not that rematch is actually set to happen. There's a lot of moving parts here. You see, the IBF has already ordered Jermell Charlo to take on his mandatory challenger, Murtazaliev. Murtazaliev, who has already stepped aside twice for Jermell Charlo. That's right. He stepped aside for the Rosario unification match, then stepped aside again for the Brian Castano undisputed title fight.
What, that's Aliev's main events fighter.
Oddly enough, the IBF is granting a bit of wiggle room here. If Murtazaliev wants to step aside to allow a second fight between Jermell Charlo and Brian Castano, if he's willing to step aside, they'll let those guys fight.
They'll give Jermell a third exception.
If Murtazaliev is willing to stand down, if Murtazaliev is willing to step aside, they'll let those guys go ahead, have a second fight without stripping anybody. That is particularly relevant to the situation between Brian Castano, the WBO, and Tszyu, because if Brian Castano can go straight into a rematch with Jermell, he can then use that rematch to circumvent his mandatory challenger, Tszyu.
That's if the rematch is next.
But if the rematch ain't next? If Jermell Charlo ends up satisfying his mandatory challenger by way of the IBF and Brian Castano isn't going to fight him for a second time, then Brian's got his own mandatory to satisfy.
No idea what's gonna happen here.
None whatsoever. I mean,
Listen.
Tszyu has more marquee value in his native Australia than either Tony Harrison, Jermell Charlo, or Brian Castano have anywhere else, anywhere on the planet. You heard that right. That's not an exaggeration. Tszyu puts more asses and more seats in Australia than those guys do, the three of them, anywhere. In a situation like that where the challenger has more marquee value than the champion, what you then have to ask yourself is that champion willing to travel? Would Brian Castano be willing to venture south, venture to the land down under to take Tszyu on in his native Australia?
Brian's been a bit of a road warrior up until this point.
But I'm getting the sense that now that he's a champion, now that he's got a belt of his own, perhaps he don't want to travel for nobody. Perhaps he wants to keep things on the PBC side of the street. And that creates a very unstable environment for this fight. I don't know what the solution is going to be. I don't know that Brian's going to travel to Australia, or maybe Tszyu's going to have to travel to America. And if he does,
Where does that put the value of the fight?
that fight's not worth in America what it's worth in Australia. You got to understand that. That's a major event in the land down under for Tszyu, bringing a title fight down there.
Tszyu.
And this is what the Tszyu people have wanted to do for the longest time. Bring a world title fight, championship boxing match for Tszyu to the shores of Australia.
I honestly don't know if they're going to be able to do that.
Given what the PBC's island policy has been, that you have to actually be one of their fighters to gain access to them. Is it possible that Tszyu's going to have to strike a deal with the PBC here in America? And if that's the case, does that make sense for him? He already has more domestic marquee value in his native Australia than any of their fighters do here in America.
Brian Castano's not a household name.
Neither is Jermell Charlo or Tony Harrison. They're nice guys, great guys. They can box a bit, but they're not superstars here. They ain't got the buzz around them here in the United States that this kid has down there in Australia. So does it even make sense for Tim to travel, even for a world title?
I really don't know what the solution here is.
I honestly don't know what's going to happen. I just know that the WBO, they're putting Brian Castano on the spot. They're putting him in a situation where something's going to need to happen and somebody's going to have to make a decision. If you're not going into a Jermell Charlo rematch, you've got to satisfy your mandatory challenger.
How does the PBC handle that situation?
What are they going to do? Are they going to try to bring Tszyu on board? Make him a PBC fighter? Is that even something that Tszyu is receptive to? It being that he's already amassed a bigger following in his country than any of their fighters have here in the United States. Do they then focus on getting Murtazaliev to step aside so that Jermell Charlo is free to fight Brian for a second time? Is that what they decide to do?
Because if they can do that, then Tim is going to have to wait.
If they can get Murtazaliev to stand down, they can go straight into a rematch between Jermell and Brian, and Tim would just have to wait for the winner. Listen, believe it or not, all of this is a good thing. It really is. Because WBO is pressuring their champion to satisfy his mandatory challenger, regardless of what he wants, regardless of what outfit he's with. And that is the function, the role that these alphabet organizations are supposed to perform. This is what they're supposed to do. It's not the WBO's job to cater to different outfits in the sport of boxing, issue out tailor-made mandates that accommodate whatever the political boundary lines are between one outfit and another and one fighter and another. That's not their job. Their job is to move their ranks along based on who's within them.
It's not their job to cater to the PBC.
Believe it or not, boxing is better when there are more of these kinds of situations. You're a champion, and you have to do what you have to do to stay a champion. And if you don't want to do it, you give up the belt and it goes to the next guy.
Because the alphabets ain't got to care who your network affiliates are.
Not their job to worry about that. That's not their problem. It's not their job to worry about who your network affiliates are, whether or not the outfit you're with wants to keep everything in-house. I mean, none of that is the WBO's problem.
The mandates are what the mandates are.
That's how it's supposed to be. In an ideal world, an alphabet organization, a sanctioning body in the sport of boxing, isn't supposed to hold out on doing their own job to cater to some promotional outfit. They're not. So we're going to see how all of this plays out and what solution, if any, can be reached to satisfy all the aforementioned parties. And finally, just in keeping with the theme of sanctioning bodies and what they ought to do, Leo Santa Cruz to return in December at featherweight, then face the winner of Conlon versus Ward. The WBA's ongoing reformation efforts are starting to pick up steam. The sanctioning body announced yesterday that it was axing all of its interim titles and beginning to order the former titleists to fight their respective divisions' world champions. ESPN knockout Salvador Rodriguez has revealed that as a result, world featherweight champ Lee Wood must face previous interim champion Michael Conlon, with the winner next in line to face super champion lukewarm Leo Santa Cruz, El Terremoto. Meanwhile, will return to action in December against an opponent that is yet to be announced. Santa Cruz hasn't fought at 126 pounds since February of 2019. It's over 2 years ago. Decision over Rafael Rivera. He subsequently moved up to 130, was gift-wrapped the super title against an unimpressive career featherweight, Miguel Flores, then got blasted into oblivion by Gervonta Davis last October.
Leo Santa Cruz should be the one on the orders.
I know that's right.
I mean, listen, I got nothing against Lee Wood versus Michael Conlon as a fight, a mandated fight. I actually like that fight. I like the idea of it. Not sure if they're going to be able to get it over the line. We'll see. I've got no complaints about the fight. It's just that ideally, in an ideal world, it would be Leo Santa Cruz under orders to fight somebody. Not those two guys, because he's the one outstanding. He's the one who's held the title at this weight
Without defending it for the last 2 years.
and if he returns in December, it'll actually be close to 3 years since Leo Santa Cruz has fought as a featherweight and has defended that WBA featherweight title. He's the one outstanding, and he's the one they should be applying pressure on. And this goes back to what I just talked about in our previous segment, that these alphabet organizations aren't supposed to cater to fighters in the promotional banners they fight under. They're not. Leo Santa Cruz was allowed to hang on to that WBA title to the very detriment of the featherweight division, because had they not allowed him to hold on to that title, Tszyu would have been elevated to full WBA champion, and Tszyu would have been able to go into a unification match with the then reigning IBF champion, Josh Warrington, and that would have brought this division the consolidation that it's still missing here in 2021. But because Leo was allowed to hold on to that belt, Tszyu never got elevated to full champion status, and that fight with Josh Warrington, that unification match, it never happened. We all know what did happen.
It's a mess.
WBA never ordered Leo Santa Cruz to fight Tszyu, which I think they should have. They never ordered that fight, and they never forced Leo Santa Cruz to choose. Even after he became a champion at 130 pounds, they never put him on the spot and told him, hey, you can't hang on to two versions of the same title at two different weights. You're going to have to make a decision. Which one do you want to hang on to? The featherweight version of the title or the super featherweight version of the title? They never did this, and they're only doing it now because they're under pressure.
The Alphabet Commission's putting a squeeze on them.
They're now forcing the WBA to do their job, the job they haven't been doing for as long as I can remember. But does the WBA's newfound work ethic ensure that Leo Santa Cruz is going to face the winner of Conlon versus Wood? Well, that depends. We don't have any assurances that Conlon versus Wood is going to happen. I hope that it does. We'll see. But even with that, even if it does happen and a winner emerges, is there any real assurance that Leo will face them? You know what the PBC might decide to do in a situation like that? They might try to circumvent the mandatory by staging a unification match of their own. And who might Leo Santa Cruz unify with, you ask? His stablemate, Gary Russell Jr., the guy he's been avoiding for years. Before they let that belt end up in the hands of some other fighter that's with some other outfit, they'd rather he lose it to one of his stablemates, so it stays in-house. Don't be surprised if all of a sudden priority is placed on a Gary Russell unification fight. The kind of priority they haven't given that fight in the past.
That could happen.
I mean, Gary's not doing anything. He got ordered to fight Ray Vargas earlier this year, the beginning of this year, by the WBC, and, we haven't seen him since. It's not like they stripped him. He's still the featherweight division's WBC champion, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if going into 2022, what the PBC decides to do is circumvent Leo's mandatory by doing a unification match with Gary. I can totally see that happening.